I'm going to be sitting down for today, just so you know. A couple reasons. First of all, I'm huge. But second of all, because I'm going to do all my stuff, work my laptop. So if you want to see me too, that's fine. If you don't, probably over there is a great spot to be. So the slides will be on the screen, as well as my laptop. I'm not a slides guy. So we're going to go through this real fast. We'll be almost done in about 5 minutes with slides. All right? Let's start with the obvious. You've seen this a lot of times already. You've probably also seen this, but make sure that you sign up for Pass Marathon, volunteer in Pass, and also look for your local Pass group. They're awesome. Okay? This is me. If you're not familiar with who I am Tim Corey. You'll find me pretty much everywhere at I am Tim Corey. So Twitter, YouTube, the web, Facebook, LinkedIn, pretty much everywhere. Okay? All right, so let's talk through what we're going to do today. We're going to introduce Azure DevOps and walk through the process of taking our code and our database and moving it through an automated process of continuous integration and continuous deployment. Okay, so we're going to automate the entire process today. And just so you know, if that's not what you're here for, then feel free to leave. I'm not going to be offended if you get up and walk out. Okay, your time is valuable. We're going to look at the code. We're not going to create the code because I want to make sure I give value to your time. And that's probably not why you're here, is to see me build code, but rather see me actually deploy code. So we'll just touch on the code we have. We do have unit testing in it, but then we're going to add continuous integration, continuous deployment, and then wrap up. Okay? So that is pretty much all my slides. Okay? So let's get to the actual thing we're here for today. How many of you are software developers primarily? All right. Database developers primarily? Okay, cool. DBAs? Other? Management? Okay. All the above. How many of you are on an island by yourself? Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, if you need help, let me know. So Azure DevOps, if you go to, let's go here, visualstudio.com. There's a bunch of fun stuff here that's for free. First of all, if you're on Windows, you can get Visual Studio. Also for Mac, you can get Visual Studio. But then either way, if you have Windows, Mac, or Linux, you can also get Visual Studio Code. Today I'll be using Visual Studio because we're going to look at SQL Server data tools a little bit and use those as part of our database process. But then down here, you also get Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps is free for up to 5 people on your team. And if you have Visual Studio Enterprise licenses, those are not counted in the 5, you actually get more. Okay, so this is all free. Just sign up here and get started. I already have an Azure DevOps project, or an Azure DevOps site with a number of projects. So let's do this. Let's start a new project today. We're going to create a project. We're going to put some source code in it. We're going to then enable continuous integration, which is where we build our source code continually every time we check in or commit code. And then we're going to enable continuous deployment on one of those bits, on the master branch. Okay, so let's create a new project, upper right-hand corner. The project name, let's call this Pass CI/CD demo. I prefer not to put spaces here. And the reason why is because this is going to create a folder name for me on my local machine when I do a git pull, or a git clone, I'm sorry. And so I'd prefer not to have spaces there. It just makes life a little easier. Okay? Description, whatever you want. And then down here, notice that right now I only have the option for private, but that's just an organizational setting. You can set up your organization to also allow public repositories, which does give you some added benefits from Microsoft, including additional parallel builds, extra build time, and some other things. It's just whether or not you want to make your source code open source. All right, under advanced, you have 2 options, which I really think is just one option. The version control down here, don't change this. It's currently set for Git. You could do Team Foundation version control. That's pretty much only for legacy stuff. So don't change that. And the other one is your work item process. So your work item process, this is what's going to set up the boards. So if you're familiar with Jira or something similar where you have the bugs and the tasks and tracking those different things, there's 4 different ways of setting that up inside of Azure DevOps. We'll get that. The default is Agile. If you just want the bare basics, there is a basic plan. You can also go with Scrum or CMMI. I'm going to choose Agile for now. It doesn't really matter for me, but I will talk through and just show you those boards. And you create your project. Now, everything in here is free. It's all modular as well. So you don't have to use Azure DevOps for your source code if you don't want. You don't have to use Azure DevOps for your boards. You don't have to use it for building. You can just pick and choose the things you want out of here. So once we get started, we see that we have, first of all, there's the boards. So if you want to create a new work item, bugs, epics, features, so on, you can do that. You can put that in this process. You can use it just for that. So it's free. So why not, right? Repository, this is where we're going to put our source code today. So you don't have to put it here, but this is a free private repository for your source code. It makes sense to put it here. Okay, we have a few options. We'll start setting this up. The option I like the best is right down here at the bottom, where it says initialize with a README or git ignore. This just sets your repository up and gets you started. And one of the things I really like is the git ignore, where I can type Visual Studio, select that, and it will set up a git ignore that not only ignores the Visual Studio default stuff, but also VS Code. So that way it clears things out and makes sure that you don't check in things you shouldn't. All right, we hit initialize. This is going to initialize our repository. I did ask for it to create a README. I don't have to, but I prefer to do that. We'll come back to cloning that in just a minute, but let's look through the other options here. So next on our list is pipelines. These are the major sections of Azure DevOps. Pipelines is where we'll set up our CI/CD process. So this is continuous integration, continuous build. Test plans, if you have a more detailed test plan than just unit testing, this is where you'd go in there and set up both automated and manual testing. So you can do a lot of testing work in there. And then finally, artifacts. This is one that a lot of people overlook. It's a newer one. What this allows you to do is create your own private Nougat feed or NPM feed, or there's a few others. Some of the benefits here are, firstly, you can put your private Nougat packages here and not make them open to the public. You can also then cache your Nougat packages that you do use. So if you pull down a Nougat package and you want to make sure that lasts and stays there, even if the Nougat package gets pulled out of nougat.org, you can cache it here. That way you can have it long-term, even if the package manager takes it away. Okay, so really powerful stuff. Again, free, and it's easy to use. Let's go back to repos, and we're going to clone our code, the upper right-hand corner. And this gives us an option here. Basically, this is the URL I need to clone. So I just hit the copy button to create, or to copy that to the clipboard. Now I'm going to come down here to my Windows Explorer. Let's go to repos. I'm going to right-click and git bash here. I'm going to say git clone and then paste in that URL. Excuse me. What that will do is it will clone down my repository, set it up, and now I have the past CI/CD demo folder with my git ignore and my README. Okay. Now, again, for ease of use today, I do have my code already written, so I'm going to copy that and paste it right into my repository. And that'll make our lives a little easier. You don't have to watch me build everything. But what we'll do is we will just commit this code and then review it. Okay. So what I have here is 4 projects. We'll review them in just a minute. But let's first go to Team Explorer, go to Changes, and then just say initial code commit, and commit everything. If you commit everything in Visual Studio, you don't have to stage it first. There we go. So it's pushing up. Okay, so source code. We have 4 projects, like I said. We have the DemoDB. The DemoDB is a SQL Server data tools project. How many of you are familiar with these type of projects? Okay, cool. So for those of you who aren't, what this is a Microsoft SQL Server database, but it's all scripted out. So for example, I have in here the people.sql. This is an easier designer to use than SSMS, at least from my opinion. Part of the reason why is because I can modify in the actual T-SQL, or I can modify in the nice GUI grid. So I kind of flip-flop back and forth between the two of them. So for example, we create a table here. Let's just add a table real quick. And we'll call this table addresses. So for example, one of the things that frustrates me about SSMS that they've never quite figured out is when you select an ID and you want to make it an identity, then you have to go to the properties and you have to find the identity specification. You have to expand it out. You have to double click on false to make it true, right? Or you can come down here and type identity, and it's done. Okay, so stuff like that just makes it a little easier in my mind. I prefer it that way, but then you can come up here and start typing and create your things like normal. So that's a really lightning quick overview of our SSDT. But if you publish this, which I do have a publish script here, what this will do is I can publish it locally, and you can use it for testing purposes. But what we're going to do is we're going to build a DACPack file in the cloud with Azure DevOps, and then deploy that right to Azure. Okay. This also has a web app, and you're going to be amazed at my design skill here. Let's start this up. This web app, what it does, it goes out to the database, and it just displays all the people that are in the people table. Okay? So we'll launch this real quick just so you can see it. Amazing, huh? All right. Okay. So we have a slight bug in our code. No worries. And forgot one services. This is dependency injection inside of the new ASP.NET Core, which is awesome. We need a connection string. Cool. All right, we'll get there. So what I was looking for here is a connection string we don't have. So we'll add that. And we'll get that from our database in just a minute. So, trust me, this page works. It worked in testing. Okay, so all this is I loop through all the people in the people table. Now I do this via a data access library, which is really simple. This is it talks to using Dapper. It talks to SQL Server, and it loads the data or it saves the data. Okay. So again, this code is just kind of setup work to get us moving into the Azure DevOps area. So let's do this. Let's go to our last thing here, which is our tests. We have a little bit of unit testing here. And these unit tests allow us to just make sure that, that our build passes, that we have valid code in here. And so I have created a couple of unit tests just to kind of demonstrate this. So I have calculation tests. So we have an add and we have a divide, and that's really it. All right? So we can run those in a minute. All right, in the meantime, let's go over to Azure DevOps, and let's refresh this page. We should be able to see our source code. Let's see if I made that one change. There's our source code. So now that we have our source code in, we've got commits rolling in, all 2 of them. Now we can start our continuous integration, continuous deployment process. So let's start in pipelines, okay? So pipelines, there are some different ways of going about this. The standard way you might see is not one that I prefer, and that is if you create both your build and your deploy in one step. I prefer to separate those two out. And the reason why is because I prefer to build everything. So for example, if you have a person who does a commit and does a pull request and says, hey, I want this to be merged in, I want that first to be built and have all the unit tests run against it, make sure it works before I merge it into my master, okay? So I prefer to separate out that build process and say, let's build everything. For release, I don't want to release everything, okay? Not everything goes to even my development server, only one branch. Typically, I choose the master branch to go to my dev server, okay? And I have a separate branch for staging and for release, okay? That's my preferred way of doing it. I'll show you different ways as we get in here. This is all Lego bricks. You can put them together in different ways. All right, so pipeline, this is where I do my continuous integration, my build process. So let's create a pipeline. This first screen here, it's all YAML. Who here loves YAML? Okay, I haven't found the person yet, but that's where this is going. I don't prefer that. Maybe you do. If you do, cool, go for it. However, there is right down here in the bottom, use the classic editor. Much preferred. I would suggest clicking that link because doing so is a visual process that asks you questions and gives you answers. I like that rather than me guessing how many spaces to put here. Okay? So the first question it asks is, where's your source code coming from? This, again, indicates you don't have to put your source code in Azure DevOps. It can be on your server locally. It's just saying, where's it coming from? So in our case, it's defaulting to this repository's Git. But I could pull from a different repository inside of Azure DevOps or Azure repos, or I could pull from GitHub, Subversion, Bitbucket Cloud, or other. Okay? So by default, it's set up for just what I need, which is my CI/CD demo, my repository, and my default branch for manual builds is going to be master. Okay, hit continue. Again, it's going to try and get you to go the YAML route because people love YAML. Not sure who. But down here, these are templates. These just get you started. You can start with an empty job right up here and just add in what you need. That's totally fine. But it's sometimes easier to start from a known quantity and then just remove the things you don't need or tweak. That's what I'm going to do here. You can choose ASP.NET or Azure Web App for ASP.NET. I'm going to choose ASP.NET. And the difference here is this one is going to not only build, but also try and do a deploy. I don't want that. So let's just do just a build. Also notice down here, there are plenty of other options, not all of which would you consider a traditional Microsoft thing, because you can build pretty much anything on this. So if you want to build Xamarin iOS, cool, go for it. All right, let's hit apply. So this has created for me my pipeline, and it has set up some basic defaults based upon an ASP.NET application. First of all, it has given it a name. That name is horrible. Let's give it a better name. Let's call this the CI build process. And the agent, so Microsoft gives you build agents. What a build agent does, that's the thing that actually builds your code. Now, it may be that you need to build on a certain platform. For example, if you were working on Xcode, you probably don't want to build on Windows. You probably want to build on Mac. So you have your options here of which version of Mac do you want. Also Ubuntu and different versions of Windows. These are all the provided build agents. Microsoft provides you build agents, and they provide you a number of free minutes. I think it's 3,600 minutes a month. I'm not positive on that one. It used to be something very, very small, like 60 minutes. You can, if you want, create your own private build agent. If you are going to do this in a production-style app, then yes, you want to create your own private build agent. There's a few benefits with that. First of all, it's going to live wherever you want it to live. So if you don't want your source code being compiled in the cloud randomly, you want it compiled on maybe your machine on your network, cool, go for it. The other thing is it'll be a lot faster. And the reason why is you're not sharing it with somebody else, and it's going to cache all the activities that you do normally. So when you pull down NuGet packages, it's going to cache those for next time, just like you would if you built it on your machine. Whereas the cloud forgets who you are every time it's done. Okay? So this is great for development. For when you're actually going to use this in a process, you might want to create your own build agent. Build agents are not hard to do. There's documentation for that, and it's walks you step by step through. It's going to be installing a small client on the machine and also opening up a firewall port or two in order to communicate to it. Okay? Now, you're going to want to install that build agent in a place that also has access, let's say, to the .NET runtime for compiling. Okay? So if you want to compile .NET stuff. Okay. So let's start with just this. What it's going to do is going to build anything that it finds that has a .sln. It's going to find a solution file and build it. And then it's going to compile everything to this thing called drop, and that is a zip file. So we'll see that in just a minute. Now, one of the things that's often missed in Azure DevOps is the fact that pretty much everything is clickable and has a menu behind it. So this is the thing. I didn't notice these up the top. I'm not very observant. But right up here, there is other tabs. And those tabs have even more information behind them. Also, notice right now we're on pipeline, but if you click down to get sources, that also has information. Didn't seem intuitive at first to me. This is where you would reconfigure where your source code is coming from. We already set that up in the beginning, but that's where it's configured and it can be changed. The one thing that you might want to look at down here is this tag sources. So tag sources allows you to put a git tag on a build. So for example, I can say, let's always tag the build, and we're going to tag it with build underscore and the build number. That we can track a commit or a build from dev all the way through to production or something like that. Okay? All right, let's look at the agent. So this agent job, this is what's going to work on the agent. These are the tasks it's going to do. It's going to start with getting NuGet. Now, this is important because we get to determine which version of NuGet we get, because NuGet changes. Yes, sir?
As far as building projects for Azure DevOps, when would you want to build a project? Would you want to build a project for every step of your dev test stage of production, or would you want to build them at times?
I build everything. So every commit for every branch. And I'll show you that, and I'll show you also where you do releases. That's kind of what you're asking for, I think a little bit more. Yep, we'll get there. So this is important here because Microsoft has committed to the idea that they don't want to break your build. We do enough of breaking your builds ourselves. Okay? Microsoft is saying, we're not going to do it for you. All right? So what that means is when they come out with a new version of NuGet, doesn't matter. You're still using NuGet 4.4.1. All right? We're not going to change that on you. If you want to change it, go ahead and change it. Then just make sure that it's still working with your build. Also, if they update this particular task, which is using NuGet, they're going to put it in a different version. So this is currently version 0.star. Okay, so minor revisions will go in here, no problem. It's not going to break anything. But anything that might have a breaking change, they're going to put in a new version. You don't get that unless you choose it. And that's by default because they don't want to break your build. So breaking changes, they're not going to break it. All right? You have to come in here and say, yes, I want to change that. Okay? Now I'm going to leave us alone at this version. I know it works. All right? Next, NuGet restore. Again, notice this is version 2. They have other versions as well. So Nougat restore is going to go out and just do a Nougat restore command on my solution. It's going to say, let's bring down all the packages you need. Now, notice that it's using the feeds that you select here. By default, it uses nougat.org. That's that checkbox. But you can also put other feeds in there. For example, if you use that artifacts, where you had your own private Nougat feed, no problem. It's actually going to be in the drop down here. You just select it, and now you can use your private Nougat feed. You can also turn off, don't use the public Nougat feed if you wanted to. Okay, next, build solution. This is a fun one because MSBuild is ugly in the command line. It's just kind of horrible. And so there's an awful lot of settings that they add in by default for us, which is pretty awesome. So by default, what this is going to do is going to build the whole thing and put it into a zip file. So you can have a one-file deploy of our ASP.NET application. That's not ideal for every solution. In fact, we're going to change something here in a little bit because we also want to build our DACPAC file, and that's separate. Okay? But these command lines, by default, are helpful. The other thing that's helpful is Microsoft has gotten a lot better with documentation. I don't know if you know this or not, but it's pretty awesome. docs.microsoft.com is actually helpful, okay? But also notice that these are not helpful, okay? Additional arguments passed to MSBuild, which is the MSBuild arguments. Thanks for restating the obvious. However, and that link doesn't link you to something else. That's just linking. That's a totally separate thing. So no, that's not helpful. But if you go to the very top, there is an I information. And this does have a link. Okay, so the top of the page of pretty much all of these pages, you're going to have a link with more information. If you click that, it's actually going to take you here where you can get more information, including if you scroll down here, MSBuild arguments, click on that link, and it will take you to all the different MSBuild arguments. Helpful, okay? So use those links at the top. If you forget, which I do a lot, and click this link, no, they're not helpful 98% of the time. Okay? So this is going to do a build of my project. It's going to compile it to a single file for web publish, and it says deploy on build. It's not really going to deploy. All right? Next, we have our test assemblies. This is where it's going to find anything that has a test DLL, and it's going to try to run MS test or XUnit or NUnit against it. So it'll run any of the test suites against it. And then what will happen is, if you notice down here at the bottom, control options, the continue on error is unchecked, meaning if you fail your tests, the build will stop and the build will fail, all right? Which is ideal. You don't want your code going any further if it's failing tests. However, if you really want to, you shouldn't. If you really want to, you can check that box. What that will do is it will continue the build and say, yes, you failed your unit tests, but that's okay, we're going to deploy it anyways. Okay? Don't do that, but you could, all right? Don't do that. So that's more for cases where, and most every task has that. I think every task has that, these control options. Okay, the first one's enabled, so if you uncheck the box, it's going to cross it out, and it's going to skip it. Okay? But the other one, continue on error, these are for things where it's optional. All right, so one of the things I used to do in one of my projects was I would take the Git commit messages and build a, what's in this release. Well, that didn't always work. No problem. I don't want to fail the build because my stupid script didn't work the way it should. I want that build to go through. Therefore, I said continue on error. Okay? Publish symbols. So if you want your PDB file, which you probably should in production, that's how you publish them. I don't, so I'm going to hit remove. There's two options here. Like I said, control option, uncheck this. Notice this continue on error is checked. Uncheck this. I could do this if I use this more for if I temporarily want to get rid of something or skip something. So for example, if I have something working, but it's not ideal, I might just disable it and put the new stuff in, see if that works. If it does, then I delete it. If it doesn't, then I delete the new stuff and re-enable these. But in this case, don't even want the PDB build, therefore I'm going to hit remove. Takes off the list. Final step is to publish the artifact. This is where we're going to create that drop file, that drop zip file. Okay? Now these are all standard, but you may say, what if I have more tasks I want to do in here? No problem. Under Agent Job, you can hit the little plus icon and get a ton of different options. All right, notice, I don't know if you can see this right here, but that's the scroll bar. Notice the size of that scroll bar? You can just scroll and scroll and scroll, which does mean that you might need to know what you're looking for. But there is a search option. So for example, if you say, I want to FTP my files, there is an FTP upload. And there's also, in the marketplace, 4 different FTP options as well. So the marketplace allows you to get things from third parties. So if you want a bunch of different things, I have used this replace tokens. That is kind of nice. That's a nice little option. But again, these are all, mostly all, free to use. All Microsoft stuff is free to use. So they do try and categorize it. So build, test, deploy. It's hit or miss, okay? But gets you closer. If you want to scroll through just deploy, you can find what you want in here probably. All right. So in this case, we don't want to do anything else. Instead, actually we do, because we've done build once, but I do want to also build my SQL Server database. So I'm going to actually build or add a new build process. I'm going to add a Visual Studio build. And here, I'm going to change the build arguments. I'm going to copy and paste this because build arguments, they're hard. I don't want to get them wrong. Okay, so the build arguments here are, first of all, I want to output to the artifact staging directory. This is a variable that will identify where we're staging and everything. That's from the Azure DevOps. Also here, I'm going to set the DSP to be this schema. So this is the schema provider. In this case, it's Azure v12. Okay. Also down here in test assemblies, I have found that there's one thing I want to add to this list. I need to ignore test adapter. So let's put that in here. So I have the looking for, in fact, let's make it even simpler. Whoops, sorry. Make it even simpler. Whoops. There we go. All right. So I'm going to look for a test something.dll, but I'm going to exclude, notice the bang in front of it, I'm going to exclude test adapter. So that test adapter, that's going to be what I use for XUnit. I use XUnit for testing. Make sure I exclude that. I'm not actually running XUnit to test XUnit. Okay, I'm just running XUnit to test my test DLLs. Okay, and also exclude everything in the object folder. All right, so that should be all we need for our build process. So let's go ahead and hit save here. Actually, before we do, this is not yet continuous integration. This is just a build process. You can create multiple of these. To make it continuous integration, you need to go over to triggers. And there's this really complicated checkbox over here that says enable continuous integration. Done. Now, by default, it's going to filter to only include the master branch. I don't want that. So I am going to come down here and say star, which means any branch. All right? So now it's going to enable continuous integration on every branch. You could choose which branches you want to enable or disable. Now, the other checkbox here is batch changes while the build is in process, meaning if I commit 18 times, do I want to have 18 builds queued up, or do I want to wait and have the 18th built? And probably actually the first one and the 18th, the ones that you built. I don't want to batch them. All right, now I can hit save. Let's save and queue. So the first one will be manual. I have found that there are times where the first build doesn't work, and it's Microsoft's issue. I'm not sure what the issue is. I'm not sure if it's warming it up or what. But so it doesn't work the first time, build it again. You're going to waste 5 minutes of your life, not the end of the world. If it still doesn't work, then it's your fault. Now, when it comes to setting up builds and deployments, you're going to have a lot of red. Okay? You're going to have a lot of failed builds. It happens. It's configuration, something you didn't quite get right. The nice thing is it will tell you along the way what the problems are. So notice I just clicked into here, and I get the output of the console for each task. So I can read back over this and see what the console was doing and where it failed. And then I can go there and fix whatever the problem was. All right, so this is currently prepping. While it's doing this, let's do this. When you come over to the Azure portal, because I actually do want to deploy to Azure today, and so I'm going to create 2 new resources. The first one's a web app. So I'm going to create a web app in my resource group. I'm going to call this the Pass CI/CD demo. Sounds good. We'll choose .NET Core 3 on Windows in the East US, which I do have a service plan for. So this is just creating a web app for me on Azure, right? Kind of out of scope of this demonstration, but basically I'm just saying in this resource group, I want to create a new web app called Pass CI/CD demo that's going to be a .NET Core 3 runtime on code, not Docker, and it's only on Windows in the East US. All right, I've already paid for it, so it's not a problem there. I hit create. That will create in the background once it starts. And the other thing we're going to do while this is running is we're going to create our database. The really cool thing is these things don't take that long. So SQL database, let's create it in the Pass resource group. I have a server already. The database name is going to be Pass CI/CD demo. No, not Elastic Pool. Let's not pay $200 a month for this. Let's go to basic and pay the $4.99. All right, so that's creating as well. Now I can come back over here, and we're not quite done. Oh, we just finished, I think. We just finished our build, and it worked the first time. That's awesome. So if you go back to pipelines real quick, you're going to see this, and it's going to indicate to you that this pipeline, which we only have one pipeline, you probably only will, but this pipeline is currently in the success. Yes, it worked for the last build. If you click on it, it's going to show you the last working build. And from this, it's going to show you this screen, which if you go to tests, notice there's no test failures. Also didn't run any tests. That's awesome. And then for the summary, we can look at the 2 published artifacts, which the build source label, that's fine. They also have this thing called drop. That's our zip file. You can download that if you want. But then notice inside here, there's a whole bunch of files, including our DACPack file. Okay? That's our database. All right? So we can deploy this to a server. Next. Now we have a working build. We can go and create a working release. You want to create a working build before you start working on your release, because we're going to use the artifact from a successful build to set up our release. All right? Just makes life easier. So now I'm down here in the left. Notice pipelines, releases. I'm going to click New Pipeline. And this again is going to set up a job for us. Fortunately, it does not ask us for YAML. It's going to create something for us in the more visual style. You could create an empty job if you want, but we're going to do a Azure App Service deployment. That just makes life a little easier because it's going to create one task for us and set it up, and it's asked us a few questions. Let's hit Apply. And now it asks us, what do you want to name this stage? I typically name this stage Development. If this were the development release, that's what I'd name the stage. Okay, and that's what's going to call this stage right here is Development. Okay, so this is release. There's two parts to releases. The first part is the artifacts, and the second part is the stages. The artifacts is where are you getting the information from that we're going to release, and then the stages are what do you want to do with those artifacts. So let's start off with adding an artifact. We click on it. It's going to say, okay, maybe you're going to want to pull from this build. We could, or we could pull from a different source. Again, Lego bricks. We can put these things together in different ways. We don't have to use the build pipeline in order to use the release pipeline, but it makes sense to do so. So the project, same project. The source, I only have one build pipeline. That's the CI build process. And it's going to say, okay, the latest version, and we're going to alias that and hit add. So that's just set up that it's going to use that build process to pull artifacts. That's all it did. But remember that build process will build everything. We don't want to deploy everything. No problem. It's not actually saying yet which builds it's going to pull. Just that it will pull builds. We get to tell it which builds we want to pull from it. In this case, I want to set up continuous deployment to always deploy a certain branch. So in the, again, everything's clickable. This little lightning bolt here, if you click on that, this is the trigger for continuous deployment. So I can check the box here. It says continuous deployment trigger. And it says, cool, which branch do you want to add? So I want to include only the master branch. So this is my continuous deployment, but only on master. Okay? And that's it. So now I have set up my release pipeline to use continuous deployment, but just on the master branch. However, I have not set up my stage to say what to do with that deployment. So let's first look at this link right here where it says one job, one task. You can click this, or again, up here at the top, there's these words up here you can also click on. Clicking on tasks will go to the same place as going to this link down here. All right? And it says, hey, it's red all over because I have not set this up yet. So the first setup task is I need to link an Azure subscription. That's because I'm deploying to Azure. Makes sense that you link an Azure subscription first. If you don't want to deploy to Azure, no problem. You can FTP, you can web deploy, you can a number of different ways. But you can even deploy to AWS. However, in my case, I'm going to link my subscription, which is not yet linked. Every time you create a new project inside of Azure DevOps, you're going to need to reauthorize your Azure for that particular project. So it's not hard to authorize. You click the Authorize button. All right, that's it. Once it authorizes, you're good to go. It may ask you to log in if you weren't logged in or if there's different credentials. But in this case, I use the same credentials for my Azure DevOps as I do for my Azure account. It's easier that way. I've done it the other way. It's a lot harder. Okay. So from here, it's going to ask us app type, which right now is set to web app for Windows. That's the default. But if you notice, there's a whole list here, Linux, containers, functions, and so on. We're going to choose web app on Windows. And then we're going to choose the app service name. And notice in here in this list is pass CI/CD demo. Okay? That's just what we just created. If you hadn't created it yet, what you could do is create it and come back here and hit the refresh button, and then it'll show up in the list. All right, so that just linked this task. This is kind of a shortcut process. If you click down on this task, it's already wired up the subscription, the service name. All right? That's only one task, and it looks a lot like the build process because it's set up the same way. So you can add more tasks if you want, which we're going to do in just a minute. But in this case, I want to go over first this Azure App Service. So it's set it up for us, but then down here, notice that you can deploy to a slot. If you're using slots on Azure Web Apps, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but a web app can have multiple slots behind it, and then you can swap out the slots to make it really quick to move from pre-production into production or something like that. You can deploy to a slot here as well. So you just check this box, and then just choose the slot. You're good to go. Now, by default, it also says, what are we deploying? It's looking for this zip file. That's that one file deploy that we saw in the build process. So we're already set up to do that. It's going to look for anywhere that says a zip file. It's going to deploy the zip file. That's it. There's a lot of options here you could do. Notice also control options are here. All right, with the same enable and continue on error. So this will deploy our website, but we also need to deploy our database. So hit the plus button here. We go to deploy, and then down here is Azure SQL Database Deployment. We hit add. And this is going to deploy using a DAC file. First, we use our Azure subscription and say, yep, there we go. We've already authorized it once. Don't need to authorize it again. And now we say we need to set up authentication to the server in order to deploy to the server. Makes sense. However, the first one is pretty easy. I'll actually just copy and paste this because you can see this. That's my SQL server in Azure. The database, I believe, was it past CI/CD demo? Let's pin these to the dashboard and then go look at them. So we have our database, past CI/CD demo. Okay. So that's our SQL server, or our SQL demo. Let's just copy this. And we'll come back over here and paste in the database name. Cool. I wish I had a drop down. It doesn't. However, login name. Well, I can show you this as well, past DB, but why are we showing that off? Okay. Test, or password. Test 1, 2. You reading that? Not cool, right? We don't want to put our password there, especially since what if somebody else comes in, looks at our build process, now sees our, in theory, production password. Not the greatest. However, there is over here a thing called variables up the top. So variables is where we can create our own little variables that we can then secure. So I'm going to hit add. I'm going to say SQL username, and I'm going to say pass DB. Going to add another one. Notice a little lock icon next to it. I can lock this. Now, if you have not saved yet, you can also unlock. Okay, so I can now unlock it and see it again. Once you save, you can't do that. If it's locked and you unlock it, it's going to wipe it out. So be warned. Now, SQL password. And again, if I'm in front of a crowd and I just start typing, you're going to see that password. But what I can do is, and I have it, this is not a super secure password. I delete it soon anyways, but I can lock this first, and then I can paste it in. Okay? You don't even see it. And no, Google saw it, but. So now once I save this, I can't unlock that again. It's encrypted one way, I can't get it back. But I can come over here to my deployment, and I can say, for my login name, I can say $, and then wrap in parentheses, and say SQL username. And for password, I can say $ parentheses SQL password. Okay? And that uses those variables from that other tab. Okay? You can use that pretty much anywhere in your build process. So if you don't want to show off your database name, cool. Or if you don't care about showing it off, but you want to put all your stuff in one spot for configuration, you can do that as well. Okay? So the last step down here is I need to choose a DAC file, which notice the ellipsis on the right-hand side. Can choose this. And then there's our drop. And inside of drop, we should find our DAC file. Okay? That's why it's good to have a build process done first, because that uses an actual drop file in order for me to find this path. Because the documentation says, well, just write out the path to where your DAC file is. I don't know. Okay? It's the build process. I don't understand the build process thoroughly. I don't know where to put files. It's somewhere in here, and it uses this default working directory. Okay, cool. You don't have to memorize that. Use the ellipsis. But that's only after you've done a successful build. Okay, I don't need any other arguments, so I can hit save on this process. All right. So with that being done, I now have a release called New Release Pipeline. Not my favorite. Let's go ahead and edit this. Change the name. I always forget to do this. Development Release. And then hit save. Notice it's asking for comments each time. Tell your team to actually fill those in. Because then, when you go to history, you can see what was done. So Tim Corey created it with no comments. Tim Corey updated it with no comments. Maybe Tim Corey should have put some comments in there to say what he did. Okay? But when the build breaks and you realize that someone has made a change, it's easy to find out what they did and yell at them for it if they actually put a comment and said, this is what I did. Okay. So now we can create a release manually, or we can do, now we've got continuous integration configured and continuous deployment configured. We can come back over here and make some changes. We already have changes. So let's go to our changes. And let's just say fixed stuff. Also a great commit message. So now that I've triggered that, it should be that it will trigger a build first.
Can I just
Yep.
say, even in a demo, please never just put in fixed stuff.
Absolutely. Yes. Just like that, don't skip the unit testing. Don't just put fixed stuff. Yes. All right. So we are currently running with our build. I didn't do anything. There's no magic behind the scenes. This is continuous integration kicking off. So you can click in here and actually click on it and watch what it's doing. So again, you can watch that. It's a little bit like watching paint dry, but you can do that. Now, also, if we go back to our database, let's grab the connection string real quick. Set the firewall as well. Server firewall, we're allowing Azure services to access this server. All right. What that means is my Azure web app can access my Azure SQL Server. Okay. Yep. Yes, so you can put a flow in there so you can say this phase, if it fails, don't go to the next phase, those types of things. Yes. Yep. I'm going to try and, if we have a little bit of time, I'm going to try and get to the different options there. All right, so let's go to connection string real quick. If we have time, I'd like to get this going. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it in Notepad. I do have to add my, my password in here. Sorry, I'm doing it off screen, but I'm trying to show you my password. Again, not the end of the world, but all right, so I have a connection string now. What you can do, this is just a little bit extra. Get your web app, and go to configuration, you can override your connection strings. So right down here, I'm going to say my default connection string, and then SQL Azure, and I paste in my connection string and hit OK and save. So now the web app will override my connection string with whatever is stored in Azure. That's the shortcut to using Azure Key Vault, which is probably the more advanced but also a better way of doing things, a little more secure. All right, so it looks like we're publishing our artifacts right now. Let's go to our release and kind of sit here because our build process is almost done. And once it's done, it should trigger a release process. Now, I have found that the pipeline seems to refresh pretty nicely. I'll actually show you the steps, but the release doesn't quite trigger as nicely as far as refreshing the screen. So you have to hit the refresh button. All right. So notice now I've already triggered release number 1. I can click on this and go into it. Again, this is where you have to hit the refresh potentially. But it just downloaded the drop file, and now it's doing an Azure publish. Once it's done this, it will do a SQL publish. We'll have just a couple of minutes here while it's doing this. Are there other questions?
So when you're talking about looking at your Azure subscription, what if you have subscriptions that are
Different domain subscriptions. It's fun. There's a process for doing it. It's a little ugly. It's hard, but it's possible. Yes. Other questions? Migration scripts such as like Entity Framework? Good question. Okay, so the question is there a way to do maybe a more manual process or scripting those kind of things to our database instead of just a DAC file? And yes, there are. So let's pop out of here real quick. It's deploying our database right now. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this pipeline. Let's talk through our other options here. First of all, let's go back one. I did say that we're going to come back to this, and I haven't yet. This right here, again, everything's clickable. We have pre-deployment conditions. We have post-deployment conditions. So, for example, we can say that before you build, you have to be approved. Okay, so I can say you have to be approved. I'm going to search for my name. Only Tim can approve it, but the requesting user should not also approve it. Okay, which means that if I were to push something, that'd be up a creek. Let's not do that. But what that means is before it even triggers this release, it's going to ping me and say, hey, you need to approve that this gets released. Okay, that can be used for a couple different things. One of them is just you don't want the intern deploying to dev and destroying everything because he overrode that don't run unit tests. But the other thing is if you want to prepare your environment beforehand manually, that'd be a great way of doing it. You pause it, you do your preparation, and then you hit continue. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Also afterwards, there's also a post-deployment. So you can say after it's been deployed, someone has to sign off on this thing. And that's where, again, it's going to ping me and say, hey, you need to sign off on this now that it's been deployed. That's also a great way of saying, now run those scripts, if you want it to be after you deploy. Again, if you want to do it manually. Question? It's not waiting. It's already deployed. But now what it is, this is where you're saying you have to go in here and make sure this is working. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is just yes, someone went in and verified and put their name to it is working. So, correct, an audit trail. However, there's also the ability to put multiple of these stages together. So that's one way people do the multi-stage deployment, is they'll just put another stage after this that is their staging, and then another stage that is production. And so if you have a post, you have to sign off that it is valid in dev before we'll then allow it to go to the staging build. And then, of course, again, before you're allowed to go into production. That's one way of doing it. I prefer not to do it that way. I prefer to have separate, whole separate pipelines for my releases. So what I would do instead is I'd come back here to my pipelines, and I would, this ellipsis. Nope, this ellipsis. There we go. There's too many different menus. If you click the release pipeline, so this is my dev release, the upper ellipsis, there is a clone. What I do is I clone that, and I make it for just the staging branch. And then I do that release process. And then just the release branch and do that process. And there's 3 separate ones. I can have different permissions on who can access the different ones. And so that's one way of doing that. But if you do want to have, it doesn't make your variables easier, because your variables now can be just for dev, just for staging, and just for release. However, if you want to, in your variables, let's go look at the variables. Notice that the scope is for release, but I could change it to just say development. What that is for that particular stage. So I can have a variable that's the same variable, but for development, for staging, for release, or production. Okay? But release means for the entire process. Good questions. All right, so we have successfully deployed. In theory, if we come back to Azure and run our web app, if my web app is not broken, it should work. There we go. So there's my super awesome web application that's, yes, you can hire me for design. That's what you're gonna get. So this is pulling from the database. So Tim, Sue, Greg, Mary, and Carol are in the database, in Azure database, and it's pulling directly there. So that's our deployment process. If we wanted to, and we don't have time for that, but if you wanted to, I could come back over here and I could change my, my post deployment script. We got a post deploy right now that says, hey, if there's nothing in people, then put people. I could change that to say, hey, wipe the whole thing out and start over. And that would actually go through the whole process of continuous integration and continuous deployment and actually go to my Azure SQL and do the work. Okay? So that's CI/CD. All right? Let's talk through a couple of edge cases. But first, are there any questions before we go on to a couple things? Yes? Okay. Right. This does not have the idea of a client running that then there's a pull. Yeah, this is all central. Now, and I didn't go over the release options that much, but if we go to add a option for deploy, there's a lot of different options here. So you can even, again, get onto a box and send stuff via web deploy or FTP. But yes, it is a centralized. The nice thing is this does deploy from where your build client is. So that if your build client is in your network and you're transferring to another machine in your network, you actually have network access to it, then you can deploy that way. There's not even a web cost there. So your build agent a little bit would be like that tentacle, but not the same. Good question. Other questions? Okay. So let's talk through a couple other things. First of all, Marketplace, check it out. There is a ton of stuff here. Please don't think that just because I did C# and SQL, that's all it does. All right? This is not a Microsoft-only tool by any stretch. Okay, so if you want to do Yarn, cool, go for it. There's a whole bunch of different languages in here, the different pieces in here that you can deploy. This also does not mean that you have to use the entire process. So if you want to use just pipelines, cool, go for it. What a lot of people do is they use just repos, which is fine. I mean, you're missing out on like 95% of the coolness, but use Git, cool, check it. But one of the things that's really nice is if you use these things together. So for example, a board, if I create a bug, and then in Visual Studio, I can say this bug is associated with this commit and commit it. That bug will then be taken through the entire process of continuous integration and continuous deployment. And you can see where that bug went associated with which build and how it got deployed. Okay? So you can watch that bug through the entire process and have a history either in the bug itself, or if you went and looked at the build, you can also see which bugs are attached and so on. Okay? So there's that integration that's just great. All right? All right. Beyond that, there are the ability to set up boards if you want to set up Kanban style boards or Trello style boards, whatever you want to do. There are those in there. I do encourage you to check out artifacts. Creating a feed is really, really simple. I just created a feed. Did you catch that? I put test in and hit go. Okay? I now have a Nougat package feed. All right? So, and to connect to that, you can actually click connect to feed, and there's your different options. But there is your options, and you just copy that and paste it into Visual Studio, and now you have your own private Nougat feed set up. So you just grab that URL, you come into Visual Studio, and the easiest way probably is if you find your Nougat package manager. There's a little gear icon up here. Click that gear icon, and then you just say the plus button, add one, put the package source in, hit update, and OK, and you're done. You've now added your private Nougat feed from Azure DevOps into Visual Studio for the build process, and then you can associate it also in your build process, your continuous integration process. Okay? So it's really, really simple to use those artifacts as well. Okay? So that's it. We've got SQL, we've got C# doing the build process. We can do multiple releases, like I said, using this idea of just clone this and create a second one, but this time for a different branch. Okay, any other questions? Okay, that's it. If no more questions, thank you very much.